Dave, is this, yeah, it's on. Okay, thank you. Morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the Florida Remediation Conference. My name is Steve Hilfiker. I'm on the board of the Florida Groundwater Association and technical committee co-chair for the Florida Brownfields Association. Unfortunately, Michael Goldstein, who was going to moderate this panel, had to head back to Miami. So I'll be filling in here at the last minute and kind of winging it, but I think I can handle the topic of redevelopment fairly well. I would say redevelopment might be one of the most important environmental issues facing the state of Florida going forward. The decisions that we make now and over the next 5 years with regard to legislative decisions regarding environmental policy are going to set the stage for the future. And what you'll see out there, if you're a practitioner serving private real estate transactions. I'm from Southwest Florida. Of course, the population growth is happening all over the state. Particular areas of the state are growing faster than others. Southwest Florida has more land. Southeast Florida has more redevelopment. Central Florida has more water quantity related issues to be concerned about. It's a very large state, very diverse state. So we have to look at things regionally as we set environmental policy going forward. I plan to play a role in that with the associations that I'm involved with and the lobbyists I connect with, and be happy to assist any ideas and look forward to an engaging discussion today about the topic of redevelopment. In Southwest Florida, what we're seeing is a lot of developers purchasing as much land as they can for current and future development purposes. That's the current development. You see that site in other areas that are more developed where it's obviously overlooked because it's not achieving its highest and best use. So you might need an environmental insurance broker to help or agent to help confirm and close that. I believe that the process of redevelopment needs to be sped up in some ways. I think as an industry, as a state, as environmental policy moves forward, we have to take a careful look at due diligence procedures, at real estate transactions, and environmental insurance can play a large role in that to speed that process up. So obviously one of our talks this morning will be on environmental insurance. The reason I say that is because if real estate transactions do not close quickly enough and safely enough, secure for both buyer and seller, and if the process of redevelopment doesn't happen quickly enough in order for developers and redevelopers to get the permits that they need to do a project profitably, and obviously for a developer, time is money. If these things don't happen quickly enough, developers are going to go to the green space. Green space being raw land, virgin land, cattle ground, former agriculture, that type of thing. I believe it's critical that there be incentives for redevelopment of abandoned golf courses or golf courses that are failing. I believe it's critical to incentivize the redevelopment somehow for current and former agricultural land that where the seller wants to divest of an asset. These are lands that are particularly the former agriculture, where it's just label application on the spraying of the cultivated field. That's not a discharge, it's not a release. However, there are low-level impacts in most cases from that normal, natural, or conventional customary spraying on the field. If you look at a 1,000-acre farm field, really the primary, most significant issues that are going to be really need management and remedial or risk-based corrective action procedures implemented. Out of a 1,000-acre farm field, chances are it's just a half-acre maintenance area, right, where the mixed load rinse area occurs. And 999 of the acres, they may have some low-level impacts from spraying over the years, but it's not Chernobyl, it's not the Love Canal, it's manageable. So a darn good soil management plan can probably take care of that type of problem fairly cost effectively for the developer. I think the beauty in some of these sites is in the redevelopment process, because you're not going to clean up 1,000 acres. What you're going to do is you're going to institute engineering controls, soil management plans, stormwater controls, contain the stormwater, keep the nutrients out of the river. Kissimmee River feeds Lake Okeechobee, discharges to St. Lucie, Caloosahatchee, turns Sanibel water brown. That's not a good thing for tourism in the state of Florida. I'm from Fort Myers. We don't want that. So we have to look at things regionally. We have to look at, for the lower East Coast, redevelopment, critical. We have some outstanding speakers here today. Many of them I know. Christian Wells will be speaking second. And Christian is the president of the Florida Brownfields Association and professor of anthropology at the University of South Florida. I think I'll introduce everybody as they speak. As I said, I'm winging it here. We have till 10 o'clock. So I'm going to kind of meet with the panelists, and you guys can listen in for a minute. What I suggest we do is basically take about 20 minutes. David, if you could start the clock here. It says 90 minutes. So last speaker will time separately, but go 20 minutes, leave maybe 5 minutes for questions. So that should get us in under the wire at 10 o'clock and allow for question answers both at the end of each talk and comprehensively at the end of the session. And if that's okay with everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sorry that I do not have your bios. Since this is a last minute fill-in, I ordinarily would have given you a much better introduction. So feel free to introduce yourself. I think that's might be the best way, whatever you submitted to Gene as your bio, the best information you want to highlight to the crowd, go ahead. Tell them who you are and what your credentials are and those types of things. I know that Patricia, environmental insurance is a absolutely critical component to closing the deal. And that you're an agent and can help. And from experience with golf courses and other projects, I can tell you that without good environmental insurance taking care of some of the risks on the site, the deals don't close in many cases. That extra added level of risk management that is provided through a good environmental insurance policy is critical to the deal. But we're going to start off with a case study. Rama Ruttala, did I pronounce that right? Is a senior project manager with Terracon and I believe has quite an interesting case study to share with us today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. And so your slides should be pulled up here on the screen. Green advances the slides, that goes back. And that's your point. So it's on this next one. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rama Ruttala from Terracon. I'm a senior project manager, and I manage petroleum registration agency term contract for Terracon for Florida division for Terracon. And primarily, I do a lot of petroleum work. And today, I'm going to present funding remediation associated with redevelopment, and more specifically, Bonnet Spring Park. And you may be wondering why this Bonnet Spring Park is so prominent in these sessions. Bonnet Spring Park, unlike in general, when you go for redevelopment, you see typically converting a gasoline station to Dunkin' Donuts, building a CVS pharmacy or Walgreens on top of it. That's more like a redevelopment. But in this case of Bonnet Spring Park, is the other way, where you're converting a former railroad yard, which is like 84 acres, and transforming into a Bonnet Spring Park, which is like 154 acres, for the recreational use. And with the multiple contaminants of concern, they're developing the park for recreational use with the natural settings. And the Bonnet Spring has like existing lagoon, and they have like a natural springs. And they're going to they design the park in such a way for recreational use with the natural settings that includes the tree house, amphitheater, boat ride in the lagoons, and children's museum. And yesterday, a talk from Geosyntek had made a very good presentation on remediation of arsenic and the management for the recreational use for the Bonner Spring Park. And today, my presentation pretty much focusing on petroleum remediation. And going by the history, like briefly, as you all know yesterday from Todd's talk, this Bonner Spring Park includes like 154 acres. That's the proposed area of development. And of which 84 acres is a former CSX railroad yard and operated for 100 years and was decommissioned in 1983. And the first discharge was reported in December 1987. From the above ground storage tank, they found the groundwater impacts and the discharge was reported. I can see it in the southern portion of the bonus railroad yard, and that discharge was eligible for cleanup under the early detector incentive program with a score of 29. And a lot of assessment was done from 87 to 2008, and after that the site was parked. And in 2017, Terracon is the agency term contractor for DEP, and DEP assigned the site to us under the petroleum registration program. So Terracon got the site in 2017, and we kind of started the assessment after doing the historical review. And you can see the aerial from 1980, which includes the former railroad yard, and also like 2019, like where it is pretty much before the redevelopment. And you can see the former railroad yard and the 5 areas of concern, which includes former mill house area, former refueling area, an oil water separator area, and former diesel shop, and the former US AST area is all at the bottom, the southern end of the Bonner Spring Park. And you can see like on the southern portion, there is like a pond, which is bought out by DOT and redeveloped. So the property has changed over a period of time, and the boundary limits of the Bonner Spring Park also changed. And Terracon went and did the assessment in all the 5 areas of concern, and for the delineation purpose. And we submitted like a template site assessment report to DEP. And we recommended closure of the former refueling area and the mill house area. And the former waste area, we cannot do further assessment because of the access to the property and the limitations we cannot do within the existing purchase order. And with the oil water separator area, we had to do remediation. But of all the areas of concern, one of the biggest stumbling block for us is the former diesel shop area. And the reason because the proposed redevelopment includes the welcome center building, which falls right overlays the former diesel shop area. And then our focus has changed because the client and the developer wants us to clean the site for them to redevelop the property. So moving forward, my presentation was just focusing on the former diesel shop area and how we address the contaminants of concern and funded and secure funding for the cleanup, and how we kind of assisted on the redevelopment of the welcome center building. And you can see here, the Bonner Spring Park looking east at the whole property after doing the grading. And you can see the small circle like toward the east property boundary and the adjoining the railroad yard. And that's the area, former diesel shop. And there's another drone shot at the close shot. You're looking south for the former diesel shop area. And we did the assessment more specifically in the diesel shop area. And we advanced like 26 soil borings to 35 feet and to the depth of the monitoring wells, and we screen the soils. And the contaminants of concern are typically like a TRPHs. And as you know, the former use is like a diesel shop. So when you have like TRPHs, they're more related to the diesel constituents, and because like a heavy chain hydrocarbons. So they exceeded the acetyl and that at exposure essential levels. And the pHs exceeded the leachability levels. And that's the plume. And we have, for the purpose of groundwater assessment, we have advanced like 18 monitoring wells to depth of 35 feet with a screen interval of 20 feet screen interval from 15 to 35, because the depth of water is very like wide ranging, like 17 to 23 feet. So in order to capture the groundwater table, we have like a 20-foot screen. And the depth, we conduct a top of casing survey, and the depth of water is like 70 to 23 feet, and the groundwater flow is pretty much like west-northwest. And we analyze for concept of concern, typically at TRPHs, because as it is, it's typically like a diesel shop area. And we have like a benzene exceeding the GCTL. And this is the plume specifically for the diesel shop area. And you can see the property boundary line joining the railroad. We on our contamination assessments is limited because we cannot go offsite because the property on the other side is still owned by the CSX. And it's so challenging to get an offset access agreement for us to do the offset access agreement. So since it's time consuming and we are tied to the redevelopment process, we went ahead and gathered enough information to proceed with the remedial approach. And here you can see the PHS plume. The blue is more like NADC, and the green, red is pretty much like typical GCTL for PHS. And as you can see in the soils, the acetyl leachability for naphthalenes are very, very high. And that reflects on the groundwater. So that's the plume for the naphthalenes. And we would overlay the proposed welcome center building, the parking lot, and the road over this hydrocarbon plume. And you can see the welcome center building and the parking lot and the roads overlays the plume. And we took the whole data and presented to our client. And this includes the lithology. You can see the wells were installed at the depth of 30 feet on your screen, and the depth of water is 17 to 30 feet. And the lithology includes like a silty clay, clayey sand, and sandy clay, all the way to like 35 feet. So finally, like Terracon is working for DEP under the supervision of the Polk County, and Geosyntek is working for like Bonner Spring Park. So we had a meeting along with the Geosyntek and Terracon, including our PE, Donna Klein, with Bonner Spring Park CEO, Bill Tinsley, and also Mr. David Bunch, and presented our findings. And the first thing they ask is, okay, how can I help you? Help us, more specifically with the funding and the timeline. And they said, if you're going to do any remediation, it should be completed by end of summer 2020. So we have an experience working under FDEP Advanced Cleanup for Redevelopment Program. So we kind of weighed our options. What is it typically if you go under the FDEP PRP program, since we're the agency term contractor and we are working on the supervision of the Polk County. Typically under the PRP program, if you want to get remediation about like 350,000, you need to have like an E-codes. So that's time consuming. And then we need to have multiple purchase orders. And then the practice code has a limited funding, especially with the COVID, the score went up to 65. So had we gone that route, we would not be even funded because the site score is 29. So we went with the route of FDEP Advanced Cleanup for Redevelopment Program, just started in 2017. And under the FDEP ACR program, and typically the amount allocated for remediation of any site is like 1 million for the applicant. And is one purchase order, and there's no deductible, but it is like first come, first served basis. It's not like you submit and you get approved. It's like a first come, first served basis. And the program is limited like for each fiscal year, like a $5 million per year. So you need to, when you submit the application, you have to be within that funding limit of 5 million. So if not, you're going to the next fiscal year. But it doesn't mean you submit the application, that means you get accepted. You have to meet a lot of requirements. One of the key requirements is you need to have like LCAR, like a limited contamination assessment report. That means you need to have enough information of delineation to come up with the cost for remediation, because they want to know, okay, what's typically it takes to clean the site. So we came up an estimated cost of 1.2 million, which includes the remedial approach of excavation and soil mixing. And this property is already designated as a brownfield, and they already got a permit approved from the local county. So that's what's taken care. And they need to show the financial proof that they can support the redevelopment project, which is the key. And on top of it, they have to support with the project timeline. So you can't say that, oh, I'm doing cleanup, I want to develop like in 2 years. It's not happening. So you'll be like below the list. So the project timeline is the key. So it's all put together, I think, and that's what they decide whether you take to the next level or not. So, and our client said, okay, we are giving you like 10 days to submit the whole package. We asked for a month, but they came up with 10 days. So me and Donna Clark worked through the whole weekend and got it. And we had to send 2 hard copies to DEP, right? And then we had to say, make sure we get everything accepted. And finally, we submitted within 10 days. And top of it, the one thing that really good for the site is the Brownfield program. So any expenses for remediation on the top of your DEP ACI program goes into the Brownfield. And under the Brownfield, you can get at least like $500,000 per calendar year, but it's only like 50% of site rehabilitation cost. But what are the costs that's covered under the ACI program cannot be covered under the Brownfield program. So it's like you can't have double dip. So what is covered in the ACR is separate for the ACR and what is for Brownfield is separate. So, and that's one of the key. So then we thought, okay, this is the good thing. We can have ACR and the Brownfield type together because the cost estimate is 1.2 million. So if we approve, we can get like a different 1 million for the redevelopment program, and remaining costs can be claimed as a VICTIX under the Brownfield for that calendar year. So finally, we got a PO in January 2020. And we kind of reached out to Matt and Graham from DEP and Bobby Scarborough and Natasha, and expressing the timeline because the redevelopment owners, they got the permits and they're ready to get started. So when we conveyed the urgency to get started, they kind of expedited the whole process and had the agreement in place in January. And within 2 weeks of issuing the agreement, we have like a PO for 1 million, which includes like 8 milestones covering all the remediation cost and the 4 quarters of post-remediation monitoring. And the whole goal is to stabilize the plume, because the former railroad yard is 84 acres. Like it said, like we can't clean the 84 acres like with $1 million. So we are going to go and approach the surgical excavation in such a way. The whole purpose of the ACI program is to go and access the contaminant that below the development process, which is beneath the Welcome Center building. That's the whole goal. It's not to clean the whole site. So for that purpose, the goal is to stabilize the plume, and we need to complete within the 9 milestones. And I think it's by 2020 or February, we'll be completing this PO. So this is the Brownfield agreement. It's for 154 acres for the whole Bonnet Spring Park, and executed, like Todd mentioned yesterday, is 2001 is designated as Brownfield. And with the change in ownership in 2016, they re-executed the BISRA in 2017. And once we finished all the assessment, and when they're doing the grading, and the owner came to us and said, hey, you can't have all the wells which are above grade on site. You need to abandon them. So we kind of abandoned all the wells even before we started remediation, including the other areas of concern. And as a part of the grading purpose, the on-site contractor, Ruda Construction, has removed like top to 3 to 5 feet of dirt from the diesel shop area. You can see the slope. So that has been removed when you already gone under the site. And to be more effective and cost efficient, we use the on-site contractor, Ruda Construction, and whose personnel are HAZOP certified and trained. And they completed our excavation and soil mixing for remediation. And here we removed like a top 3 feet of the clean overburden, which includes within the excavation area. And also we did the excavation with the 1:1 slope. So we removed the overburden also, including the slope. And we staged all the overburden on the south end of the excavation. And here is a picture of how we removed the overburden. And approximately we took like 2,000 cubic yards of overburden and staged on site. And since the objective of our excavation is not digging up all the way to the bottom, is we want to dig to the depth of the water table and then soil mix 3 to 4 feet into the water table, because we don't want to do dewatering, and this tedious process of dewatering, especially considering the lithology of the site with the silty clay and clay sand. So we chose this approach of excavation soil mixing to avoid the dewatering purpose. And also it's an open field and there's no structures, so we don't do any sheet piling purpose. So first we want to determine what's the depth to water for the depth to water for us to determine the extent of excavation. So we put a test pit, and the depth to water is uncounted is like 19 feet below ground surface. So we kind of excavated from 3 to like 19 feet. to the bottom of the excavation, and then a kind of mix with the Regenesis Petrofix, like 8,000 pounds with the ORC within the backhoe bucket, 3 foot into the water table. And we had disposal like close to like 9,000 tons to Heart of Florida landfill. And once we did the backfilling and also once we did the soil mixing, we covered like top 3 feet with the clean dirt so that to provide support for backfill operations, because it's like a slurry. When you backfill it, it's like a slurry, it's a dark slurry, and the machinery can't stand on it. So we finished this is the south portion of the excavation. We did it in 2 portions for the safety purpose with the 1:1 slope. You can see the south portion excavation 19 feet with like a slight water. And also you can see under the same area, soil mix with the Petrofix, which is a Regenesis product. And we mix per the recommendations from Regenesis. And this is the north portion of the excavation. We excavated 19 feet, and disposed the dirt, and also we did the same thing. We did the soil mixing using the existing on-site contractor, and we soil mixed like 3 to 4 feet into the water table.
5 minutes.
Yeah, okay. And we have like a backfill with the clean backfill, and we kind of compact tested like every foot all the way to the ground surface, and it passed like a 90% modified proctor test, and we use approximately like 800 cubic yards of clean backfill and the overburden. And this is what it looks. So we backfilled it and with the clean sand all the way to the top, and gave it to the Bonner Spring Park for them to start the construction process. So we went back, and as a part of the post-remediation activities, since all the wells are abandoned, under the key milestones for the purchase order, we need to have like a perimeter wells, like 9 wells. So we went back, installed like a 9 above ground monitoring wells above grade, and we monitored for the parameters, including the temperature zone of discharge parameters associated with the Petrofix from Regenesis. And you can see we monitored, we finished like 3/4 of monitoring, and you can see the plume has decreased significantly. And also, but the only point of concern is the well in DS18, which is on the adjoining east of the property, close to the CSX. We cannot access because of the limited access, because we had like 1:1 slope. And if you cross it, we are going offsite of the property. So we are limited for that reason. And the small, like a benzene exceedance is like 1.5. So it's slight exceedance above like GCTL of benzene. That's what the current status right now. And finally, as of date, we submitted, completed the work and completed close to like 8 milestones and reimbursed like $980K out of $1 million approved for Terracon. And on the top of it, the 200 grand that was spent for remediation was submitted for VTIC by the Goldstein firm in Jan 2020, and was approved. And for the current, for 2019 calendar year, they have like $500,000. And they got like VTICs from 2017 for 75K and VTIC for the 133K. And this is what the Bonner Spring Park in 2019, before we started remediation after grading. And this is what it looks in 2020 when we gave the site and they built the Welcome Center building. And you can see on the east side, the diesel shop, and they put the road and the parking. And this is what it looks now. We have the Welcome Center building and the plantations, the road, and pretty much we gave them even before they wanted. And I want to thank DEP, Matt Ingram, Bobby Scarborough, and Natasha for the support in expediting getting this PO because it's on a tight deadline. And also we thank Geosyntech for helping through the process. And I also want to thank Bill Kinsley and David Bunch from Bonner Spring Park for really understanding the whole process. And above all, I want to thank my Terracon staff, especially Donna Klein, our PE, and Dan and David, who are no longer with Terracon. We have like Ricker and Eddie, who are helping us with the post-remedial activities. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rama. Excellent use of the available funding and great planning. Looks like a lot of time and planning and effort went into the process. Obviously, that's such a large role. It's beginning with the end in mind. And looks like it's going to be an exciting place to be. I look forward to visiting that. Are there any questions for Rama about the project? Question in back?
Getting the process into schedule, getting the funding.
So the coordination of the funding through petroleum, or was it more challenging?
The thing is, we work backwards because
Matt, was it more challenging for the petroleum funding, or was it more challenging for the brownfield funding?
no, it's more like the Warner, the Bonner Spring Walk. They have the permits and they're in the process. Okay, we want to get it done by December 20, like summer of 2020.
The timeframes.
So we need to work backwards to the front.
Yeah, yeah. Begin with the end in
So,
mind.
Yeah.
Good way to approach a project like that. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Would you have one more question here?
No, it's just the 4 quarters, and after that, we kind of abandon them. Because the whole goal is to stabilize the plume. And we already lost one well above ground with the existing park construction. And we kind of went and replaced like last quarter. And we now would not put above ground, we flushed to the surface.
And how does the parameters show that?
Oh, for aluminum, there's an exceedance of aluminum, but all of the parameters within the level. So there's a bounce of the aluminum. We are going to look into that.
And is the aluminum existing or?
I think it's a both, correct? Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we have time for one more question up here.
Consider treating that, I guess, the 9,000 tons of material on site.
We thought of doing like thermal, but when we did the cost-effective approach, it's better to dispose because we did for our Orlando Sanford Airport project, the thermal treatment and using it as a background. So, but we thought it's more cost-effective getting it done and disposing offsite.
Well, thank you very much for an interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Next, we have my friend, Dr. Christian Wells, who started November 1st as the president of Florida Brownfields Association. Christian is going to talk about the Brownfields Redevelopment Atlas. And I did have time to find the bio information. So Dr. Christian Wells is president of the Florida Brownfields Association and professor of anthropology and director of the Center for Brownfield Research and Redevelopment at the University of South Florida, where he has served previously as founding director of the Office of Sustainability and deputy director of the School of Global Sustainability. I can tell you that his leadership is bearing fruit with the Florida Brownfields Association, and I'm glad to introduce to you my friend, Dr. Christian Wells.
Thanks very much. Got it. All right. Good morning. How is everybody? I came over this morning from Tampa. I thought I was going to take I-4, but I got rerouted twice. An hour and a half trip turned into, I think, about 2.5, 3 hours. Wonderful. So I feel great. Just to stand up anyway. Thanks for the introduction, Steve. That's nice. And thanks for mentioning the Florida Brownfields Association. I have to start every talk with a short commercial about FBA. I don't know if there are any FBA members here. The FBA members? All right. I would love to talk with you. So the Florida Brownfields Association is the state's largest nonprofit advocacy organization for assessment, cleanup, and redevelopment of brownfields, with a special emphasis on working with communities that have environmental justice challenges, and also with a special interest in promoting brownfields to health fields, much like the Bonnet Spring Park talk that Rama just gave. So parks and conservation, federally qualified health centers, we promote a lot of work with community gardens and so on. So of course I did bring with me a large number of brochures that I printed out this morning at home. So I'm happy to distribute these for folks that are interested and want to learn a little bit more about the association. We've got a couple of hundred members, and they represent everyone from scientists to consultants, a lot of lawyers, developers, nonprofit organizations, university faculty and students, just a wide range of people that get together on various committees. Steve mentioned he's a co-chair of our technical committee that reviews policy and practice through the rulemaking process at DEP. And so many of the guidance documents that you probably use on a daily basis have had Steve's hands on them, massaging them to make them sound better and be more efficient. So we appreciate your leadership on that. All right, this morning I'm going to talk about something a little different. This is the Florida Brownfields Redevelopment Atlas. And get it going. So this is part of, at USF, I direct the Center for Brownfields Research and Redevelopment, which was established by an act of the Florida legislature in 1998, following the 1997 Florida Brownfields Redevelopment Act. And this is a university center that's designed to take all of the interdisciplinary scientific expertise at USF and bring to bear on research on environmental toxicants, land use legacies, brownfields redevelopment, community revitalization. And you can find us at usf.edu/brownfields. We have sort of three main thrusts in the center: research, redevelopment, and education. I'm going to talk today about the research thrust, but I'll just mention that we do a lot of work with partnering with communities to work on redevelopment projects. I'll show an example later this morning about the university area community, where we did a 7-acre redevelopment with that particular community. We've already also started working with Port St. Joe, and more recently in southern Manatee County with the community of Tallahassee. That's quite well known for its groundwater contamination issues. We also work in education. We have an environmental workforce development and job training program for residents of East Tampa. And we're in the just toward the end of training upwards of 100 East Tampa residents in environmental health and safety and various OSHA standards, and helping them get jobs in the broader environmental industry. So a few years ago, I was approached by EPA and DEP, and they were interested in better understanding the impacts of the state and tribal response program. This is a program that's part of the Brownfields program at DEP that's funded through Circulus Section 128A funding. And it takes the form of two different programs at DEP: the Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program, or TBA, and site-specific assessments. So DEP's Brownfield program provides funding for assessment and remediation of brownfield sites through a competitive application process. And both organizations, EPA and DEP, were really interested in the efficacy of that program. What happens when people take advantage of those resources? Do the sites get redeveloped? How long does it take? Does it have an impact on the community socially, economically? What happens to the environment? It's sometimes hard to follow up, 10 years later, or however long it takes sometimes to redevelop brownfield properties. So they asked me to come up with a way to do that. And so I created the Florida Brownfields Redevelopment Atlas. And it's really just basically an online GIS tool. I think it's easy to use. It's free, it's open to the public. You can find it at our website at usf.edu brownfields/brownfields, or on the FBA website or DEP's website. So the idea is to bring in a lot of data from different organizations and overlay them so that you can zoom in on your redevelopment property, whether it's got a BISRA or not, and you can learn everything you need to know about it. Basically to apply for state or federal funding, but also to look at changes over time in what's happened, before, during, and after redevelopment of that brownfield site. So you can sort of track the progress of it. So this is at the census block group scale. So this is the smallest geographic scale that's available through the US Census Bureau. So we include a lot of data from the American Community Survey, for example. And let's see, you can get some pictures on it. Little pop-ups, little widgets, they call them. We've also started to incorporate COVID-19 infection and death rate data so that you can track the health of communities that you're working in. And so the data come from all different sources: the National Historic Geographic Information System, the user interface, though, it's Google Earth. It's got American Community Survey data from the US Census Bureau, statewide parcel data. There's everything from that's available publicly from DEP, and a lot of information from EPA, the EJ Screen tool, and many of the other databases that EPA has been releasing over the years. What's unique about this particular tool compared to others that are available for Florida and the Southeast region is an emphasis on social and economic data, so that when you redevelop a site, you can look at social demographics in the community before, during, and after redevelopment. So you can really tell, is this redevelopment project a catalyst for additional development? How does it impact the health and wealth of a community? And so there are a lot of demographic, economic data. We have new economic data on total businesses, total employees, tax payroll data. So you can really track economic impacts of brownfields redevelopment also. And data are only as good as people who enter them. So we wanted to spend the past couple of years ground truthing the atlas to try to see, is the atlas able to make predictions that are useful about, or characterizations that are useful about the redevelopment of the site. So we went out in the car and drove all over Florida for the past 2 years, and we visited about 100 sites that have benefited from this program. I have seen so many abandoned, vacant lots, parking lots. I mean, there's some really great redevelopment projects, but there are others that just stall, for years. So we collected, we had a questionnaire that we would use, and we would go and fill out this questionnaire for each site, take photos, and then we would talk to property owners. We would talk to people in the neighborhood and ask them about their memory of redevelopment of the site, and sort of interview them. So we have a lot of quantitative and qualitative data for each of these 100 sites, and all of that's being entered into the atlas too. I'll just give you a couple of examples. We have a simple return on investment, ROI calculator, that the atlas is able to use. And this example is from a former wastewater treatment plant in North Palm Beach. And the atlas calculated a 10, this is on a scale of 1 to 10. They calculated a 10 return on investment, and our site visit confirmed that through the questionnaire and through interviews. This was a site in Pahokee, and the atlas did not give it a very high return on investment for a variety of reasons. I can talk about that later. It gave it a 3, and our site visit confirmed that. But then there were a number of places where the atlas and the site visit differed, and this is one of them. This is Miracle Strip Parkway in Fort Walton Beach, right across the street from the water. And the atlas predicted a pretty high return on investment, ranked at a 7 out of 10. But our site visit did not support that. And we were very curious to understand why this particular property that had received assessment and remediation funds was not being redeveloped. And there weren't very many people around, but there was a fast food restaurant next door, and I was kind of hungry, so I went in. I hadn't heard of this before, but it's called Whataburger. Has anyone had a Whataburger? I don't know. So I went to the Whataburger to see. And the owner happened to be there, and I asked the owner if he knew anything about this property, and he said, yes, in fact, I bought the property some years ago and benefited from the state Brownfield program to clean it up. And I said, well, what are you gonna turn it into? And he says, well, nothing, I'm just gonna leave it vacant. I said, why? And he says, because Wendy's was going to buy it and move in next door. And I didn't want that to happen, so I just acquired that property, and now it's just going to sit there. So you never know with these brownfield redevelopment sites what's going to happen. So getting out and visiting these is really become very, very interesting. I have too many stories to share. So we also track the usage analytics, and a lot of the usage is increasingly by local governments that are using the atlas either to plan redevelopment or to understand changes in their community, and also to apply for state and federal funding. Universities are using it increasingly for teaching and for research, And we see a lot of developers starting to contact us and ask questions about how they might be able to incorporate this into their development plans. We're also able to track who is using it by zip code throughout the US and especially in Florida, and just to better understand who's using it and how we can improve it. We're always working to improve it. So I just wanted to give you a couple of quick examples of how people use the Atlas. Many local governments are starting to use it, and nonprofits to apply for EPA multi-purpose assessment and cleanup grants. And we've constructed some parts of the Atlas to give specific information that EPA asks for on those RFPs. Not just in the application, but in other factors and considerations that can sometimes add bonus points to your application. Some nonprofits are using it to apply for state and federal resources. This is one example called Harvest Hope Park. This was a 7-acre brownfield property near the university area near USF in Tampa. And they made use of the Atlas to help redevelop this particular park. And this was a 7-acre property that was an informal landfill. It had been used previously as a police athletic league back in the 50s and 60s. And so there was some arsenic application that happened back then. And it's surrounded by light industry. So there was evidence of some lead and arsenic from that light industry and hazardous waste. So they redeveloped it into a park with the community, and they used the Atlas to help design and develop where they wanted to put different amenities. My favorite part of this project was we did a charrette with a local elementary school and asked the kids to help us design the playground. And so they got out their crayons and they drew these fantastical things. They wanted a swimming pool, they wanted a splash pad, they wanted ponies and a barn. We couldn't give them all of those things, but we gave them a slide. They love it, they love it. It's been a real catalyst. We've used this as an example with the Atlas to try to track how a redeveloped site can catalyze additional redevelopment in the community. And so we're tracking other organizations that have come in now and that are redeveloping areas around the park. Habitat for Humanity has created a number of houses, and another nonprofit has come in and it's developing affordable housing for the community. Another example is we were contracted with the city of Tampa to conduct a vulnerability assessment. And so we used a lot of the data to do some statistical analysis and create GIS overlays to track the location of brownfield and Superfund sites, how they interrelate with flood zones, and how that interacts with different demographics and different neighborhoods. And so we were able to do some of these overlays and identify very specific neighborhoods that were most vulnerable in terms of hazardous waste, flooding, and different climate resilience aspects that the city was interested in. And then finally, we're now working with the Florida Brownfields Association, particularly the Environmental Justice and Public Health Committee, that want to get ready for all of the federal flow down resources that are coming from, presumably, the Infrastructure Act, infrastructure bill that was signed recently. And so they're interested in identifying throughout Florida, as best as they can, all communities, at least one in every county, that have environmental justice challenges. And so we've used the Atlas to identify where the location of all brownfields and then where we suspect brownfields are based on a lot of the information that comes from the Atlas. And so now we're going to be getting back in the car and driving around Florida and looking for nonprofits and local governments that can help us identify communities that have environmental justice challenges that can take advantage of some of this infrastructure funding. All right, I've said too much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to take questions. And I'm happy to distribute brochures for FBA.
I'm happy to help you do that. I first met Dr. Wells, I think it was in that Orlando meeting where there's a tornado warning, or we all had to huddle for a little while, but you know, the Atlas is a very, very powerful tool. And you know, I think it would be worthwhile for you all to go visit that website within the next week or so, play around with it, you know, take a look and see what resources available, see how it works for you. present it to your peers and colleagues within your firm, within your organization, your agency. Utilize it, and then reach back out to Dr. Wells, and I'm sure he'll be happy to walk you through because this so much time and effort has been put into this very powerful tool. I just encourage you all to use it as the resource that it is. I think the EPA and DEP have put this together, have asked you to put this together for that very purpose.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's free and open to the public. I think it's easy to use. Although I used to bring a computer to talks and show it in real time, but it never works because of the internet or something. So I didn't do that today. You know, people contact us all the time and ask us, can you do a search for this, or can you help me locate that? And we're really happy to do that. So I have a bunch of cards I can hand out, and I'm really happy to help. And there's a short Vimeo, a little video that we put together showing you how to click on things and where to look, and, you know, step by step how to use it. So you can check that out too.
well, microphone will be delivered to you. I think we have a question over here.
Just curious how long it's been for you to develop it
I work with a graduate student and make them do all the work. No, that's how it works. So it was just us, and
Speak
we
the
did
truth.
it in about a couple of months. But then it grew over time, and each year we add additional data. We have an advisory group, and they, you know, they'll say, well, we need, you know, political districts on this, or we need updated census data, or so we're just constantly updating it and adding new information.
They have to earn their master's degree somehow, right?
That's right.
How about some other questions for Dr. Wells? The question was, have you evaluated the transit?
Oh, transit.
well,
Yeah, have you evaluated transit-oriented redevelopments and then the impact they have, you know, like on further redevelopment around them?
I have not, because no one's asked me to. But
Okay,
now,
I'm asking.
but now that you do, okay, I'll go back and do it. We have another center at USF, the Center for Urban Transportation Research, Cutter, and we work with them a lot on transportation and multimodality kind of research. And so I'll definitely look into that. It's a very good question.
For the benefit of the audience and for David, who's hustling to try to get the microphone to everybody before they ask the questions, please raise your hand if you have a question and we'll get you the microphone. Any other questions? We have a few moments for another question or two.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. That was terrific. Such a great resource. Our next speaker is Patricia Mills. And Patricia is here to present insurance solutions for brownfield redevelopment projects. Patricia is the owner and president of Mills Environmental Insurance Services, LLC. And Mills Environmental Insurance is an independent insurance agency specializing in insuring commercial contractors and consultants in the high hazard environmental and renewable energy sectors. She has over 30 years of experience in the environmental industry, insurance industry, and holds the CRIS, CLU, FLMI, and ALHC designations. And I'm sure those very, very, very high credentials. So as I said in the opening remarks, I think environmental insurance, I know environmental insurance is critical on some sites. It's the deal, it's the make or break deal maker. If you have a good environmental insurance policy to protect those risks, such as third-party liability and other things that Patricia will be explaining to you in this presentation, it will make or break a deal in many cases. So thank you so much for what you do. You've provided a valuable service in the redevelopment industry, and I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Good morning. So we get to talk about insurance, everybody's favorite topic here, I'm sure. Everybody loves it when their insurance agent says time for renewal. Well, this one is close to my heart because it's site development, redeveloping the land. So this one I love to do on-site pollution coverage. So we're going to talk about different solutions to try to get these deals closed for everyone here. As we all know, the brownfields can be profitable, and that's the reason we all have businesses, to be profitable. So this is something that if we can close them, there is profitability in the brownfields. The developers and property owners can find the redevelopment opportunities very rewarding. I mean, so this is something you definitely should look at when you're looking at the brownfields, is maybe in order to get that deal closed, insurance may be the ticket. The risk. Now, your underwriters, I always get these phone calls. Hey, Patricia, can you kind of tell me I have this property, exactly how much? Just give me an estimate. No, I can't give you an estimate. I need to know about the property, the development. What are they going to put there? I mean, is it residential? Is it industrial? Are we next to homes? There's so much that goes into an underwriter's quoting process. So there's a lot of information they're looking at. Your real estate owners, operators, and developers, they face environmental risks from your broad range of exposures. So you got your historical property use. That's the first thing the underwriter wants to know. Was there a phase one? What was there? I mean, do we have underground storage tanks? Was it a chemical storage facility, a battery? They want to know what's their exposure, what was there prior. That's their first question they're going to ask me is, Patricia, where's my phase one? Let me get the history on this property. What was there for it? Tenant operations, what's there now? Or is there anything there now? Was there a dry cleaner there using PERC? Was there a gas station there? So they wanted to know who the tenants were on that property. Neighboring properties, where are we? You know, can we possibly have migration with, you know, groundwater plumes, vapor intrusion, those exposures? So they're looking at the entire risk. And there's a lot of questions that have to be answered before they'll even consider it, or will they consider it? And my job is to know the information to sell it to them. They don't go in their system and put in the information and get a quote. These type of risks are underwritten. And so there's a lot of information I have to sell to them. So the more I know, the better chance we're going to get the best premium possible. If I say they don't really know, well, guess what? Your risk there, they're going to probably quote it a little bit higher. So the more information you provide, if you are looking for insurance to close the deal, the more we can help with the premium on that. Purpose of the insurance. Well, purchasing the insurance can help, as we talked about, close the deal. I mean, that can definitely be a deal closer. They're available to offer protection, basically limiting some of the risk in developing contaminated properties. The one thing I do want to point out here, on a contaminated property, we know it has to be cleaned up. Your underwriter is not going to insure what needs to be cleaned up in the known contaminants. He's insuring the unknown contaminants. It wasn't caught during the phase one or the phase two, and 2 years later, we didn't catch this. We have insurance, don't worry about it. If it's a known contaminant, you're doing remediation on it. You're cleaning that up. So they're not picking the known contaminants. They're picking the unknown contaminants that occur a year or two later, and we have problems, and they're migrating to other properties. So that's the insurance deal, and that's what a lot of people are worried about. Especially can help with the sellers that say, hey, I want to sell the property. I kind of know, but what if they find something else? The buyers who may be concerned, what if I have to shut down business and for 6 months to get it cleaned up because you didn't catch this? Your lenders, they don't want to have to go into foreclosure. So the lenders definitely have a lender's policy out there to protect them. So insurance will go in and pick up and protect the lenders. Sometimes they're very concerned about it. And then the developers as well. So those are the type of people that may be looking at environmental insurance, and I get calls from every one of them asking me for coverage. So just to give you Environmental concerns. Well, your past owners, as we talked about, could be potentially liable for environmental issues that are uncovered after the sale. Your buyers could face a future business interruption as a result of environmental concerns. We talked about business interruption. The lender, the inability of the borrower to help pay back the loan due to the environmental issues that were unknown. Your contractor consultant potentially liable while performing due diligence activities that have been non-disclosed. So these are all things that environmental insurance can help with. There are different types of environmental insurance. If you're remediating a project, you don't want site pollution, you don't own the site. You want contractors' pollution liability coverage. You're going to the site to remediate it. There's so many times I look at contracts, I'm like, okay, why are they asking for the person that's doing the remediation to actually cover the site itself? They don't own that site. They're going to remediate. So that's what a contractor's pollution liability policy is for. If you're a consultant or you're a remediation abatement contractor, you need contractor's pollution liability coverage. Professional, if you're a consultant, your errors and omissions, you failed to notice something. So professional coverage. Your lender environmental protection is for the lenders. There's a separate policy that can be purchased if it's just for the lenders. And then you have your site pollution liability is for the brownfields, which is the site itself. It's covering the unknown contaminants. It's actually covering that site if something were to occur. There used to be a thing back in the day, a long time ago, called cost cap insurance. A lot of people still ask me, hey, is cost cap out there? It means you were a remediation contractor, you gave them a bid for $2 million, but you have overruns. You didn't realize there was more contaminants than you thought. We had big carriers like AIG, Zurich, all of them. They'd sell insurance if you had cost overruns. Well, they all got hit hard and that's no longer available. There are a few, like Lloyd's of London, may consider it. Very rarely do they consider it, but I've seen maybe one go out there and the premium was astronomical. So really cost cap has gone away. It was not profitable for the carriers. They could not handle that cost or the exposure anymore. So cost cap for you guys, it's no longer there. Contractors pollution and professional liability. We've already discussed this, protects against the environmental damage during construction, your remediation project, and your professional is your errors and omissions in the performance of professional services. So those are two policies majority of you, I'm going to say 98% of you probably have right now or should have if you're a consultant or a contractor. Lender environmental protection. This is in event the borrower defaults on the loan and the property is environmentally impaired. So they're defaulting on the loan because of an unknown contaminant and now the property is environmentally impaired. The policy will pay the lender the outstanding balance of the loan or cost of cleaning up the property, whichever is less. Don't you like how they say whatever's less? All policies read that way. So outstanding balance of the loan gives them, okay, we're going to get paid off. We don't have to go into foreclosure. We're not taking that property back. So that gives them a real comfort level. It'll also pay for the cost of cleanup required of the bank by government authorities if they come in and say it must be cleaned up. So that's lender environmental protection. It's a separate policy just for the lender that's out there that may help you close the deal. Site pollution liability, they're all claims made policies. To trigger coverage, the claim must be made and report it to the carrier during the policy period. You can't go by the policy 2 years later, make a claim where you don't have a policy in force anymore. You've got to continue that policy year after year after year. So that's why these policies are written 5, 10, 15 years. They're not written as an annual usually. They're usually written for longer periods of time. Common coverages offered by the pollution liability policies. On-site for the site pollution coverage, you've got on-site, off-site coverage, third-party bodily injury, property damage claims that happen from existing unknown or new pollution events. It could be an unknown, or maybe we have a new pollution event that just occurred as well due to the new owner. So as long as it's not part of the remediation and they're known, you can have new pollution events. You also get cleanup costs from existing unknown pollution or new pollution events, including coverage for discovery and restoration costs. So these are some of the highlights of their site pollution policies that are out there. Actually, this is one of Zurich's policies. And then Zurich under and I went out and did a talk, so he kind of put some of his slides in here. Known pollution conditions are not covered, except as we talked about in very limited and controlled cases. So let's just say you get an NFA, they're comfortable with the remediation, they don't really feel it's going to be a big problem. They may cover possibly that known condition that you remediated. There's a possibility of getting coverage back. It always comes at a cost, but if it's important, sometimes we can add it back. BI coverage might be offered if it has no further action has been granted by the government agency allowing contaminated soil or groundwater to be managed in place with engineering and institutional controls in place. So that's kind of their stipulation as far as that's concerned with known contaminants. It's rare that they give it to me. I mean, I ask for it a lot of times and it's rare that I'm able to get a known contaminant. Additional coverages offered by site pollution liability policies. You get legal defense associated with the covered loss. If anybody's had a claim, your biggest cost is legal. I mean, if anybody's ever seen legal, that's where majority of your claim, that's why you're one of the most important reasons you're buying insurance is you got to defend yourself. And if anybody, there's attorneys in here, sorry. If anybody's hired an attorney, you only have no idea of the cost. So the biggest part of any policy you buy is legal defense to help you. So that's one of the most important ones. Cost associated with business interruption, loss of rental income or construction delays, they're all going to come into play. So this policy is going to provide that as well, things we don't even think about. Property damage, including cost for, and I can never say that word. All right, diminution in property value and third-party loss of use. So we get property damage cost, natural resource damage, and transportation of materials coverage, contamination that occurs if a spill happens while materials are being transported. You can see there's a lot of additional coverages here you don't think about, but when a claim occurs, you will, because when you see the cost, you're like, thank God I bought that policy. So these are some of the most important ones. And we're all seeing business interruption. You know, I didn't see a lot of claims till COVID hit. And I'll tell you what, business interruption occurred with COVID for so many companies. And unfortunately, with restaurants and them, they didn't get it covered, majority of them. But business interruption is really key for a lot of businesses. So make sure if you don't have it, kind of look into it. You'd hate to be down for 6 months, not being able to work. Some of the other common coverages offered is crisis management, depending on what the contaminant is, emergency response, coordination services, reopener coverages for sites at no further action or equivalent determination. Coverage can include participation in the state brownfield voluntary cleanup programs and limited asbestos and lead abatement, inadvertent disturbances. So majority of these policies with asbestos and lead, they will exclude, but they will give limited coverage for it, for inadvertent disturbance. As we talked about, your common coverage options, they can be written for 10 years usually is what I'm seeing most people want to do because it's a claims made policy. And the limits can go anywhere from 1 million to 25 million. On the risk, as far as what the limits are, they're available for higher limits for multiple carriers you can possibly get. And your deductibles start at 25,000. So you have high deductibles on these, depending on if the property, how contaminated that property is. The underwriter is going to look at it and say, what do I have there, Patricia? What are they developing and where is it located? And after that, they're going to determine, I want 100,000 deductible. I want 25, I want 50. When I go to him, 25 is the lowest, but it's going to depend, is it residential going around there? We do like the Whataburger where nothing else was built next door. I can insure that real quick. I give him a real good deductible for that Wendy's that he just wanted to keep the property vacant. But normally we have a lot of different things. I got a call, or Amazon's gonna basically have a, just storage facility. Well, good. That's pretty easy to do. But if you're doing a shopping mall, if you're doing something like that, then the risks are higher for the underwriters and they're going to look more closely at these risks. So when you're looking at insuring them, first thing we're going to want to know, so don't come without a phase one. If you don't have a phase one, then there's no reason to even talk to me yet. Because that's the first thing he's going to ask for, is I need to see that phase one or phase two, whatever kind of reports you have. He's going to want to know what they are, what's on the property, has it been remediated, to even look at insuring them. These are not easy policies to get underwritten by carriers. They're not producing these like this. We really have to provide as much information to even get him to quote them. So, we have about 6 or 7 carriers that do look at them for us at this time. We ship them to all of them, everyone has different exclusions. Don't think every policy is the same. Every carrier will throw in different exclusions, different terms, conditions, and different pricing. So if you were looking at a policy and say, why is this one 70 and this one's 100? Well, they're probably not the same policies. One's giving you probably a lot broader coverage that you probably need, and the other one may be excluding quite a few things. So pricing, yes, is important, but to me, my most important thing is going to be your terms and conditions, what's covered, where is the exposure, and are you willing to take on risk, or would you rather have the insurance? That's basically what insurance is for, is transferring your risk to somebody else. So keep it in mind, not every policy out there is the same. Important consideration for use of environmental insurance at brownfield sites. It should not be reviewed as a way of managing known or anticipated pollution risk at a poorly characterized, minimally investigated site. It's not there to say, hey, I'm going to manage this risk with insurance. The insurance is there for the unknowns that happen afterwards, that, we didn't catch this, we got an issue, let's go back in, we have to do more remediation. So, and the ability to acquire the coverage depends upon the underwriter's ability to understand the site's historical use, current site conditions, and anticipated future use, as we just talked about. Those are key for them to even look at it. Each policy is site specific. So each one is underwritten for that specific site, and they'll vary, coverage varies site to site. So the limits they offer, anything they offer, it's going to go site to site as to what they can offer us. These Zurich under, I was saying the good site data is necessary for them to considering offering the coverage. And this typically starts with a recently phase one, as we talked about, and it depends on site conditions, including investigation reports, presenting finding from collection and analysis of soil, groundwater, or vapor samples. So he is actually looking at all the information. And for a well-characterized site, each insurance can be an alternate for managing risks associated with unknown conditions that might be encountered during the redevelopment. Insurance can be used as an alternative to or in combination with escrow funding that you may be using, indemnity agreements that may come up as you're looking at them, or sales price reduction to manage the actual or perceived environmental risk associated with the properties. Most of the time I get the lenders saying, hey, I'm not going to close unless you give us a policy. So that's really pretty frequent, that's what we'll see the most of, is the lenders coming to us saying we need a policy in order to close this deal. And I'm sure if you're doing them, that's probably what you're seeing as well, or it could be the developer. As we talked about, they can be very profitable. There's risk associated with each one, but they can be mitigated by an insurance policy. So if you guys happen to have any that you want to look at or anything, come by my booth as far as, we can look at the case, see what we can do for you as far as the risk is concerned. But this is the way to actually close a lot of these deals. Some are closed without them, but I think it's a really good policy that they have out there now to help you guys close it and mitigate your own risk. Is there any questions? Yes. He's coming.
I wanted to see if you could provide some insight into how PFAS is being addressed in the insurance industry now, since it's an unknown contaminant that hasn't really been investigated at many sites. If in the future it becomes regulated and a site has to be assessed and cleaned up, is that something that's covered by insurance, or is that excluded for most policies nowadays?
No, PFAS is not. Are we talking site pollution? So if you're remediating, if you're a remediation contractor, no, PFAS is not excluded. On your policy, that's what the pollution liability coverage is for pollutants that you're remediating. On site pollution, if you're looking at a brownfields to cover that site, if they didn't find PFAS, no. The most important things I'm seeing on the policies is basically excluding asbestos, lead right now, but PFAS would be included if it's an unknown. If it's a known condition, then they want you to remediate it. If it's an unknown condition, then no, it's picked up. So, it just depends on what the phase one is showing. But remember, you have to remediate the known conditions. You got to clean up your site. This is for unknowns that occur afterwards, and it would not be an exclusion.
So to clarify that, if a diligent assessment is completed with all chemicals of concern, but PFAS is not assessed, it's therefore an unknown.
Correct.
And if it's discovered later on in the project, would PFAS be covered under a policy for that
Yes.
purpose?
Yes, it would. Mhm.
Good question.
Hi.
Yes.
So I just had a question. Will a lender always get an insurance policy for a contaminated site? And also, how do state programs like a VCP program impact your assessment of rates? Is that all factored in, or is that separate?
Okay. Will a lender always? No. The answer is a lender has, that's up to them as far as they want insurance or not. It depends on what bank you're dealing with. So a lot of times they do on the larger projects, nastier sites, they want security.
Mhm.
So, it just depends on each lender, and site is going to be, each site is looked at differently. As far as safety and everything else, in order to get insurance, you must have that. So that's going to allow you to have insurance basically, and probably a favorable rate. But the underwriter looks at all of that. So people think, well, I have this safety, I have this. Well, that allows you to have the coverage, if that makes sense to you. They're looking for all of that to make sure they're comfortable with the risk. So that helps them to get comfortable with the risk. So someone else may be declined, you may be insurable because you have those. So.
And lenders are protected through the secured creditor exemption. They're also protected in Florida statutes in various circumstances in the Brownfield legislation. There's
Right.
portions of the Florida statutes, 376, 308 has a section for lender liability. And lenders are primarily interested in just basically making sure that the default is covered.
Exactly.
You had mentioned in your presentation that occasionally there are some riders on these policies in the event the lenders are asked to pay for remediation costs. And obviously the purpose of these exemptions and protections in the legislation protects them from those costs as long as they don't make particular management decisions or get involved and become kind of a procuring cause to exacerbate the problem. So my question is, have you seen any agency, federal or state, look to a lender for any costs since maybe the early 90s when it was happening?
Have I seen? No, it has
Okay.
not come. I mean, I probably issued a handful, with different lenders or whatever, and a claim has not occurred yet for
Okay.
us. Usually, I mean, we're lucky that we sell the insurance, but claims are rare. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
It's rare to see a claim on a site pollution policy. So they're few and far between on those.
I think
The cost
given.
overruns were the ones that came
Right.
in, just killed
Yeah,
us.
and I think the degree to, I mean, those protections that were put in the state and federal laws for lenders have made lenders comfortable
With-
with
Yes.
loaning, providing the loans, as long as their debt service is covered in the event of default by.
Right. And they're not getting,
by
they
the
don't want the
borrower.
property back. So
Right.
the insurance helps them. We're not getting that property back. So there's protection, just comfort for them,
So those-
especially on the larger deals.
Those lender policies are terrific for the bank, for their own protection.
Right.
How often do they extend those policies to the borrower? Can they be extended to the borrower as well?
Yes, they can. You can extend them to the borrow and you can have a policy covering different people, but it's cheaper just to do the lender. So the insurance cost for just the lender is very reasonable. When you're looking at the borrower, the cost goes up. So when people are looking at pricing, oh, I can get this, I'm going to save this much money. They may just buy a lender's policy. So the cost will go up if we're protecting the borrower. Mhm.
And to the extent that you can communicate these, this information to your clients, to the buyers and sellers in the transaction, you can facilitate these transactions and really help them get them faster to the closing table to the degree to which you understand the value of the tools that are available through environmental insurance.
Right.
Are there any other questions?
I have a quick one.
Yes.
So on the known versus unknown issue, do you run into, so the underwriter does a review of the phase one?
Oh, yes.
So are there cases, I could just see a problem with maybe someone not doing a thorough enough job or purposely avoiding, say, the PFAS, testing for PFAS so that it would be covered in the unknown later. Has that been an issue?
Well, you know, the phase one is what he's got to go on. He doesn't know people personally. He uses paperwork that's provided to us. Sometimes we kind of know some people, oh, wait a minute, that's that company. Maybe we're not taking their phase
The
one.
quality,
I hate
yeah.
to say that, but some people are known to need, they've seen enough.
Mhm.
But no, they have no idea. What we submit to them is all they have to go on, and the trust in the agent that they've met with the people, they have a trust. So we're firsthand underwriting to our carriers, to those underwriters. And we have a trust factor going on, just like we do with you guys. We have a trust factor going on. This is the information, and we'll do our best. But yes, can it occur? Of course, it does occur. So, yeah.
I think another, in addition to PFAS, another interesting scenario might be an underassessed, where there might be arsenic was tested very thoroughly. We're at fairly low cost to assess arsenic, but the full suite of pesticides and herbicides may not have been tested as well. And your assessment, the site assessment report submitted after the phase one is very thorough in arsenic, but may leave out some of the other related chemicals of concern. How would that scenario play out if that came up in the remediation?
Well, as far as the remediation is concerned, you know, I'd have to ask him. You know, every case is different. You have to kind of look at the parameters of it and say, okay, this came up. You know, he may have an exclusion for certain things. They can word the policy in a certain way, dependent upon the wording of your reports. If he feels like, I'm not real sure here, there
Right.
can be, if this occurs, then this, but we'll cover it after this time frame. These are all manuscript policies. These policies are all manuscript. The underwriter types up whatever endorsement he wants. That's why I say every policy is different. They're all manuscript by these people. So any kind of concern they may have or get a feeling for, they may manuscript an endorsement in your own policy, and we'll bring it to your attention. Well, we saw this. This is how he's going to address it. Are you comfortable with it? So that's a very difficult to say exactly what everybody will do. Every underwriter is different too. Some of them take more risks than others. They're like, we're not. Okay.
It's really a project manager, for those in private practice and consulting. It's obviously a very, very important project management skill to be able to know your client, to be able to know their risk tolerance, and to recommend a more thorough assessment on the front end to minimize your insurance cost on the back end, and to make sure that the hidden skeletons in the closet don't come up and, either kill the transaction before it closes or create a liability after it closes.
And on really large projects, they have their own engineers, they have their own they may go out there. You can find if it's a very large project that they really will consider it, they may go out and do their own phase ones. Most of these underwriters came from the environmental consulting. They're not just underwriters, they came from the field, so they're very familiar, okay, that these carriers have hired. So if you're an environmental underwriter, you're more than likely were an environmental consultant or had some specialty in the environmental arena before you became an underwriter. So yeah, everyone's looked at differently though.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you for an informative presentation. Our next speaker is Jim Cotton. And Jim is going to discuss the roadmap to redevelopment, a framework for redeveloping contaminated sites with Florida case histories. And let's scroll for a minute here. Jim Cotton is a professional geologist with over 17 years' experience as an environmental consultant. He has worked closely with federal, municipal, and private sector clients on projects involving due diligence, site investigation and closure, remediation feasibility studies, risk assessments, regulatory compliance, and water resource planning. Jim is a principal geoscientist, principal geologist with Montrose Environmental Solutions. And welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Steve. So forward, right?
Forward. And, yeah.
All right, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I think your introduction covered me. I think that's enough. So let's get on the road to redevelopment. But I'll advise you, put on your seatbelts. I'm not a good driver. At least that's what my kids tell me. So this morning, I'm going to go over some general topics. The drivers presently, the factors that are driving redevelopment. I'll present our roadmap, which is really just a basic approach, a stepped approach, particularly when confronting a site that is contaminated. The gotchas, or to keep it tight with the theme of the talk, the road hazards. These are conditions that could swamp an otherwise successful project. And then finally, I'll present two site histories of successful contamination treatment and redevelopment here in Florida. Just want to make a footnote. Like Steve, I'm standing in for someone. I'm not intimately familiar with the case histories, but I'll do my best to describe them and answer any questions you might have. So currently the drivers for redevelopment, we've got a record inventory of blighted properties. That's partly due to the COVID crisis of 2020. A lot of people left the cities. There was a mass exodus. We are getting some rebound from that now. But people that are moving back to the cities or living in cities, they want to live close to work. So developers are jumping on this. They want to build the next hot area for the millennial or Gen Z workforces. In addition, prices are a consideration. If you go outside of the urban centers to raw land, it's more expensive. Some of the blighted internal properties, they will have some existing infrastructure that could make it less expensive to do your work and redevelop the site. Regulations. The regulations themselves have been in place for decades. It's the regulators that are changing. They're becoming more savvy. They're becoming more pro-development, pro-redevelopment. And then finally, politics. It's the adage, who you know matters. Also, the election cycles matter. It's an opportunity for new politicians to craft a success story for themselves. And what's better than turning a blighted property into a usable, desirable, and tax generating location. Finally, let's not forget that the infrastructure bill, I believe, is slated to bring in 50 billion in circular related initiatives. So that will definitely have an effect as well. Okay, the roadmap. So this is just the basics. No secret sauce here. We're not attorneys. You'll likely need one if you encounter contamination. It's highly recommended you get a knowledgeable and skilled environmental attorney, such as our host or moderator, previous moderator. Also, we're not investors, but access to capital is a must, obviously. So we'll start with the first step. When you're looking to buy or invest in a viable property, start with the end in mind. Look at the big picture. Consider identifying all of your screening criteria very carefully. Always weigh risk to reward. It's very important. And be very specific in your screening. Be mindful of the road hazards, the gotchas, which I'll go over in more detail in a minute. And consider using the tools that are available that are free, such as the Brownfields Atlas that was introduced earlier. And there's a lot of map-based GIS tools available through the DEP as well that you can do a quick free skim through and get an idea of what's going on in the neighborhood. Okay, the second phase would be your due diligence. This would be the phase 1, phase 2s. Can't stress enough how important these are. And when you consider the cost to conduct one, it's pennies compared to the overall budget. In fact, on a big project, I'd even consider getting a second opinion. It is relatively inexpensive. I can tell you in my own experience, looking at other people's work, even within our own company, you find mistakes, you find missed recognized environmental conditions. It can be because of poor data. It can be because even a site rehabilitation completion order was issued when it shouldn't have been, or it was issued in the 90s before the regulations changed. So it's really an important step that's relatively inexpensive. It also forms the basis of your liability protection under CERCLA. It's not a lender's instrument only. It's good for the seller to understand what's going on with their site. And it's very good for the buyer to understand as well for negotiating and leveraging the purchase. Site characterization. You want to know your own site's history first. That will drive the design of your study, more so than surrounding properties. But also understand the offsite, what could be migrating onto your site from offsite, and what that means for funding. It could mean opportunities to get funding from other folks or from regulators. But also consider what is on your site migrating off and how that could affect you. In that case, you're likely going to own that liability and the cost for cleaning it up. These all matter unless you get Patricia's insurance. Okay. All right, so in the remedial planning stages, your end use will define your closure option. So this is the risk-based closure options that in Florida have been around since the mid-2000s. In other words, if you're developing for an industrial use only, the criteria are different. You may be able to leave contamination in place with a engineering control, a declaration of restrictive covenant, that sort of thing. So it really depends on the scenario and the remedy. If you do have to clean up, consider using sustainable remediation alternatives. This could be something as simple as putting solar on the rooftops of the carports to run a system. It could be using green concrete or recycled concrete, stabilizing soils in place instead of hauling them off. Generally try to stay away from the long-term groundwater cleanup strategies. It may be less expensive, but there's a carbon footprint, that goes with that. And this kind of introduces the whole ESG issue that's coming along. It's more prevalent in Europe than it is here. It's, for those that don't know, it's environment, social, and governance. It's basically your company is more important than just the profit. It's also about how do you treat your people and how do you treat the environment. And while it's not yet an issue in the States, in the European Union, if you've got a low ESG rating, there's a good chance that you won't be able to work with certain governmental agencies or bid on projects. That may or may not happen here. But if nothing else, if you lean towards sustainability, it's good for your PR, it's good for your ESG profile. Also understand the nature of the contamination. How significant is it? Are the concentrations high? If they are, it's better to remediate up front. That way you're not exposing your construction workers that don't have OSHA training to potential contaminants. On the other hand, if it's, say, petroleum contaminated soils or some tanks, you might be able to put that together at the time of site construction, share resources, share equipment, and share labor. Okay, the gotchas. So again, these are items that could derail an otherwise successful plan or strategy. So for environmental conditions, it's everything I've talked about so far, the due diligence, but it also includes things like ecological considerations, gopher tortoises, owls, snakes, other critters. It's also important to get an idea of the geotechnical nature of the site. Is it suitable for the type of development you're putting in? I know here in Florida, we have a lot of low-lying ground. That peat and muck that might be there, relatively inexpensive to go out up front, get an idea of where that is, how thick it is, because they don't support buildings too well or other structures. Infrastructure, also get a lay of the land. If you are in a blighted area, like I said earlier, you might have access to existing infrastructure that could make it less expensive. If not, putting in, say, new utilities, new underground utilities, it's not cheap. Also consider your stormwater management plan. Make sure it doesn't conflict with any existing infrastructure. On permits, if you are building on a previously industrial site, it's very possible there are existing permits that require closure. Make sure you have a thorough understanding of that and what's involved. This could be air, it could be stormwater, wastewater. It just depends on the site. Any wells that need to be abandoned, septic, you're likely going to have to connect to city water and sewer. Okay, and then the last one, the title, any type of land use restrictions or DRCs that I mentioned earlier. If there are existing ones on site, again, make sure you consider those. Make sure that you aren't building a stormwater structure adjacent to an area that's limited use for groundwater. It may disturb it. It also could be a potential exposure pathway for your workers. So all of these elements are important in assessing the general risk of a project. Any one of these gotchas, again, could swamp an otherwise successful plan. All right, so for the case histories, even though regulatory requirements may appear to be set in stone, these two examples provide very unique outcomes, and it's not always prescriptive. You're always going to get a different scenario. So the first one is the Sunseeker Resort. This one I think is currently being built. There was a time where it was delayed during COVID, but I believe as of April of this year, it's under construction. It's near Port Charlotte. It started with 12 contiguous parcels, and there was a very intense effort in the phase 1 and phase 2 levels of this work. But even with that, even though there was a site that was known to be contaminated, it was a former Chevron, There were tanks discovered in the southern portion of this site that fortunately later they were able to get into the abandoned tank restoration program. But this is a perfect example of how a phase 1 and 2 may not discover everything that's there. In fact, I think on this project, there was GPR done on the entire site and they still didn't see it. And I believe there were vent pipes sticking up and documented in the report, but somehow it slipped through. So again, be very thorough on that first stage. So this is going to be a multi-use project. It's being developed by Allegiant Air. It includes a 500-room hotel, extended stay suites, restaurant, shopping, a marina. Obviously, a lot to build. In this case, there was some existing infrastructure, certainly proximity to roadways, and I believe some electric and water and sewer. As I mentioned, there was a Chevron station at the central portion of the site that it was eligible under the PLRIP funding mechanism. Montrose took that a step further and secured under the advanced cleanup program got funding $1 million up to, and it was submitted in 2017 with the goal of unconditional closure, which was achieved in 20 months. So the performance-based criteria were met and the timelines were met. And as was mentioned before, time is money for developers. So having a good team that's a construction team working with your environmental team is critical. The SRCO for the central portion was issued in 2019. I believe the southern portion where those unknown tanks were located, that is undergoing long-term monitoring under natural attenuation monitoring. But it did, as I mentioned, get some form of funding under the abandoned tank restoration program. That could have been huge if that hadn't happened. That could have been something that could have swamped this particular site. All right, so the next one, this site is in Jacksonville. It's called the former American Cell Cure. It was a wood preserving site. So they used chromium. It was a chromium and I think arsenate, but it's in an area, what makes it unique, it's north of downtown. It's in an area where it's an old part of town where there's a mix of industrial and residential. And because of the density of the residential, it's an area through HUD and USDA known as the food desert area. So in other words, the population density is high enough that it should have a grocery store that it's lacking. So some local residents purchased the property. I don't know the exact date. They did not have the phase 1 and 2 data available. They weren't, I don't believe they were even aware of that process. So I believe the work started in 1984. There were 12 assessments done and almost $1 million spent with no remedy. So I think you saw probably earlier, the contaminants of concern were the inorganics and some chlorinated solvents in the deeper portion of the superficial, and I think got into the intermediate aquifer system. FDP's SAS group got involved in 2009. They did a pretty thorough investigation. They got delineation vertically, but as the contaminants migrated off-site, and contaminants from a former, I believe it was an electrical equipment company that used solvents in cleaning their equipment. They could not determine whose responsibility that was. They recognized that this was a deal killer. This could not be covered by the owners and it would prevent any redevelopment of the site. So in August 2012, they transmitted the cell cure letter, which I understand has become kind of a precedent and an example for other projects, in which they stated essentially that the owners would not be liable for the groundwater cleanup. They'd be liable, I believe, for the soil cleanup, but not the groundwater. Kudos to DEP for seeing the greater good. and enabling redevelopment that otherwise may not have happened. Here's a few photos during remediation. Yeah, that was a unique one that, well, both cases really, there were situations that weren't known up front by the potential purchaser or the owner that ended up being covered through public funds. And that is it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
That Sunseeker Resort is going to be phenomenal. So
Yeah, that's your neck of the woods.
yeah, from Southwest Florida, Fort Myers and Port Charlotte, Allegiant Air, what's happening in Charlotte County with the development of the airport and Allegiant, really building that out and that development. Port Charlotte, their emphasis behind that development, a lot of resorts in Naples, a lot of resorts in Fort Myers, and then there's a lot of resorts in Sarasota North. So this one prime resort pending for your future visits to Southwest Florida. Are there any questions for Jim?
Yeah, did they call it a travel hub? or-
Travel
I think
hub, yeah,
that's the-
Allegiant's really doing some good work down there. And then they're providing that whole concept of bring it all together with the airport travel,
Mhm.
resort, restaurant, one
Marina.
one-stop shop tourist destination. So
Mhm.
looking forward to that.
All right.
All right, well, a couple of points on your talk to kind of close and round things out for the discussion for the topic today of redevelopment. Pay attention to the soil blending guidance document that the DEP currently has in draft form. That's available on the DEP website for review. Final comments are due December 31st to the DEP. We are working as a technical committee for Florida Brownfields to provide our comments, but any association or individual can provide comments on that. Same time frame for the soil management plan guidance documents. And these two guidance documents are going to be critical because 62780 for site assessment remediation. These are good plug-in documents for policies that are not clearly enough described in some of the language in 62780. So these guidance documents are going to be remedial action plan specific, great supplements to the guidance by the department on how to do a good remedial action plan on the large acre sites such as a golf course, agricultural redevelopment, where 62780 may not be completely applicable and that guidance document is necessary. So you will benefit, from a lot of those projects, all the companies in here that are working on these large acre sites. I think you'll find those two guidance documents that we'll be rolling out in 2022 to be very, very useful in our environmental policies and getting these deals done to protect our green space and water quality, water quantity resources going forward. One final chance for questions for Jim. Any questions for the panel? Well, thank you for attending our redevelopment panel this morning, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.